The first message came through the faculty emergency list with a subject line that made everyone in my department roll his eyes before he opened it. Missing stars, that was the phrase. Not dim stars, not bad seeing, not a pointing error, not a cloud deck moving through a long exposure. Missing stars in a narrow field north of Cygnus, reported by a small observatory outside West Cliff, Colorado, where the air is usually dry enough to embarrass bigger places with bigger budgets. The operator had taken a normal calibration run for a student variable star project and found a patch of sky where the catalog said there should have been hundreds of usable points of light. He got fewer than half. The rest were just gone from the frame. The sky around the patch was fine. The guide stars were fine. The telescope track, the timestamps were clean. The first thing I said out loud was, no, that is not a discovery. That is a broken pipeline. I was in my office in Boulder with a plastic container of cold noodles on the desk and a stack of grant comments open on my laptop. I am 60 years old, and I have spent enough of my life around telescopes to know that the sky gets blamed for human mistakes all the time. Somebody forgets to update a star catalog, somebody images through haze, somebody sets the wrong filter wheel position, then swears the universe changed, somebody lets condensation form on a corrector plate, then writes a dramatic email at midnight. I open the raw frame expecting a bad flat field or a detector issue. I check the header, I check the coordinates, I check the seeing estimate, I checked the comparison field from the previous week. Then I zoomed in and stopped chewing because the empty area was not circular, not square, not shaped by the detector, and not aligned with the chip boundary. The missing part had an edge. That bothered me more than the missing stars. Clouds do not leave a clean edge in a narrow, deep exposure unless the wind and timing line up in an absurd way, and even then the brightness gradient gives the game away. Bad calibration leaves patterns tied to the instrument. Satellite interference leaves streaks, blooming, reflection, or little mistakes that repeat across channels. This thing had an irregular border, but the stars outside it looked normal down to the expected magnitude limit. Stars inside the border were not merely faint. The software did not find them, and my eyes did not find them either. I pulled the old Palomar plates from the archive. Those same stars had been there for decades. I pulled Gaia position data, then older survey images, then a narrowband image from a public archive because I wanted the most boring explanation on the table before I let my brain go anywhere stupid. By 7:10, 3 of us were on a video call. Nobody smiled. That is usually when I know a group of scientists has moved past jokes and in trouble. A postdoctoral researcher in our department ran the star positions against the modern catalog and found the coordinates matched. A retired observer in Fort Collins said he had seen something similar the night before but assumed his mount had slipped. That sentence can ruin an evening. I asked him to send everything. He sent it, all of it, including the calibration frames, weather notes, mount logs, and his own angry comments written at 2 in the morning. His field overlapped the Westcliff field by a few arc minutes. The same absence was there, shifted only because his pointing was a little different. I want to be clear about something from the start. When people say the stars began turning off, that is not what the first data said. Stars did not blink out in front of our faces. We were not watching little lights click off in the black sky over Colorado. We were looking at records of light that had already traveled for years, centuries, and in many cases far longer. The night sky shows events after long travel time. Sirius is a few years out of date when you see it. Deneb is much older by the time its light reaches your eyes. Galaxies carry older messages, so when a point of light vanishes from an image, the event tied to that absence may have happened long before any living person was born. That fact should have made the room calmer. It did not. It made the room quieter. At 7:43, I called a friend at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff. I did not say I had a cosmic emergency because that is how a man loses credibility. I said I had a coordinate set that needed a sanity check, and I asked whether he could grab a short exposure between scheduled work. He grumbled because telescope time is not a favor you hand out, even to old friends, but I heard his chair move. 20 minutes later, he called back and said the same field was wrong. He used a different telescope, a different detector, different software, a different site, and a different observer who did not know what he was supposed to see. The stars were absent in the same place. I asked him to check the infrared band if he could. He said the instrument he had access to was not ideal, but he would try. Then he said my first name in a way I had not heard in years, and I knew he had already looked at the shape. By 8:30, Kit Peak had a notice in its internal queue. Nobody there used public language. Nobody said disappearance. The note said field anomaly. Probable catalog or processing issue. Request cross-instrument verification. That is how serious people write when he knows every word may be read later by lawyers, directors, agencies, and reporters. Kit Peak matters because it is not one telescope in a shed. It is a major observing site in southern Arizona with a long history and a lot of independent hardware, and hardware independence is the first real protection against self-deception. If one camera fails, fine. If one team makes a processing mistake, fine. If 3 instruments at separate sites with separate operators reproduce the same absence, the mistake has to be hiding somewhere larger than one lab. The first public leak hit before 9. Somebody on a hobby astronomy forum posted a cropped image and wrote that a star field had gone dark. Most people mocked him. Some called it a hoax. A few started matching the crop against star maps and realized the coordinates were real. That was the moment the story left our control. though control is the wrong word because we never had it. Reporters called observatories. Observatories called university communications offices. University communications offices called faculty who had not finished looking at the data. I was not the most famous astronomer in the country. I was just old enough, calm enough, and close enough to the first Colorado reports that a national producer found my number and asked whether I could explain what missing stars meant without turning the segment into nonsense. I told her no at first. Then she read me 3 sentences from a draft her network planned to run. The draft said astronomers fear stars are dying in a chain reaction. I told her that was garbage, and I used a sharper word before I remembered she was just doing her job. Stars do not die in neat rectangular pieces of the sky because one small observatory has a bad night. Stars do not coordinate across distance for dramatic effect. A supernova announces itself with brightness, spectra, shock, remnants, neutrinos in close cases, and a lot of math that does not care about headlines. This was not stars dying. This was light failing to reach us from a defined region, blocked, absorbed, redirected, cut off, or hidden by something between the source and us. Those are not the same claim, and the difference matters. At 9:15, I was sitting in a little guest room at the broadcast center in Denver with a glass of water, a borrowed earpiece, and a producer telling me to keep it simple. That is a dangerous request when simple can become wrong. I told the audience what we knew and what we did not know. I said a patch of stars cataloged in previous surveys was not appearing in new observations. I said multiple observatories had seen the same absence. I said no one should assume the stars were destroyed. I explained that some of the light we see left its source before the United States existed, before telescopes existed, before humans had names for most constellations. I said the event might be far away old and not related to Earth at all. Then the anchor asked the question every viewer wanted asked. Could it spread? I said we did not know. That was honest. It was also the first time I felt afraid. The first full-night comparison came from Arizona after midnight. The darkened region was larger than it had been in the Colorado frames. That sounds straightforward until you remember Earth rotates. Instruments change, exposure lengths vary, and atmospheric conditions can lie to you. The team at Lowell did the right thing. It did not compare pretty pictures. It compared star catalogs, limiting magnitudes, filter responses, known variable stars, and the frame edges. Then it sent a coordinate mask to Kitt Peak and asked for an independent run. Kitt Peak got the same boundary, and the boundary had moved against the catalog, not moved across the sky in the way a nearby object moves. Moved through cataloged background sources in a pattern that could be measured. That was when the language changed from anomaly to event. I hate that word because it sounds cleaner than reality. In the control rooms, the event meant men and women at consoles trying to decide whether to interrupt scheduled science, whether to wake directors, whether to freeze data access, whether to issue an alert to other facilities, whether to call government contacts, whether to let graduate students keep working on machines that might soon be taken offline for security review. Outside those rooms, the event meant people standing in front yards and staring up, unable to see anything different with their own eyes. Most of the missing stars were too faint for naked eye viewing. The public had to trust instruments. That is hard on a good day. It is brutal when people think the sky itself has become unreliable. At 1:20 in the morning, my phone showed a message from Mara Chen. I had not heard from her in 8 months. She had been my student 15 years earlier, back when she still drank terrible gas station coffee during observing runs and argued with me about whether wide field surveys would make old school observers lazy. She had become a scientist who made old men feel useful because she took the training and outgrew it. She was working that week at an Arizona telescope array on a survey calibration project. Her message had no greeting. It said, "I have the edge in 4 filters. It is not dust. I am sending what I can before admin freezes outbound transfer." She sent 6 files, a plain text note, and 1 image she had made for herself, not for publication. The image showed the darkened region in layers: optical blue, optical red, near infrared, a narrow hydrogen band, and a comparison against an old survey. Dust can fool casual observers because dust blocks blue light more strongly and lets longer wavelengths behave differently. Dense molecular clouds have infrared signatures. Gas has emission lines. Ordinary obscuration leaves fingerprints. Mara's layers showed a harder absence. The missing sources did not redden. They did not smear. They did not show the soft behavior of light passing through normal interstellar material. In the near-infrared, where some dust problems become less severe, the same catalog sources were still gone or deeply suppressed. Her note had 1 sentence underlined by repetition: no thermal compensation at current sensitivity. That meant the lost light was not simply being absorbed by an ordinary object close enough and warm enough for us to see re-radiated heat in the available data. If you block starlight with dust, rock, gas, or engineered surface area, energy goes somewhere. It heats material. It scatters. It glows in another band. That is basic bookkeeping. The universe does not let you throw energy into a drawer and forget it. Yet the quick checks found no matching infrared glow bright enough to explain the missing light. That did not prove anything impossible. It proved the easy explanations were dying faster than we could replace them. By 2 in the morning, I was back on air because the network had decided a calm astronomy professor was cheaper than panic and better than letting political commentators improvise astrophysics. I explained wavelength checks. I explained why an optical error would not reproduce across sites. I explained why a dust cloud should leave color changes. I explained why a black hole was not the easy answer people wanted. A massive foreground object would bend light. Gravitational lensing can distort, magnify, split, and shift background sources. We looked for that. The boundary did not come with the expected arcs, the expected distortions, or a mass model that made sense. A black hole big enough to wipe out that field in that way would not be shy in the rest of the data. The anchor asked whether this could be a weapon. That question had already started circulating online, mostly from people who thought every unknown thing had to belong to a government. I said a weapon against whom? A weapon near Earth would affect local measurements in a way our satellites, radar systems, and sky surveys would notice. A weapon at the distance of the affected stars would need to operate across volumes that make human military language sound childish. I did not say that to insult anyone. I said it because scale matters. A national missile defense system, a satellite jammer, a stealth aircraft, a secret laser, none of that lives in the same sentence with a region of sky losing cataloged stars across multiple wavelengths. Still, the military came in fast. People later acted shocked by that, but it made sense. Satellites use star trackers to determine orientation. Deep space missions use known sky positions. Surveillance systems need stable celestial references for calibration. If a section of the reference sky changes, you do not wait for a philosophy committee. You check whether any navigation, timing, pointing, or attitude control system is affected. Before dawn, a man from a federal office I will not name called our department chair, then called me directly. He did not threaten me. He did not need to. He asked whether I had received unpublished frames from Arizona. I said yes. He asked whether I had forwarded them. I said no. He asked whether I would refrain from distributing raw files until a coordinated statement could be drafted. I said I would not leak student data to strangers. Then I said science does not become safer when it is hidden from scientists. That line sounded better than it felt. I was tired and I was angry, and I knew the man on the other end was not the villain in some cheap story. He had the same problem we had. He was trying to keep airplanes, satellites, and command systems from reacting to rumors. I was trying to keep the public from being fed a polished lie. Neither job was clean. By 4:10 in the morning, the first coordinated bulletin went out from several observatories. It confirmed an absence of catalog sources in a defined region of the northern sky. It stated that no threat to Earth had been identified. That sense was technically true and socially useless. People do not hear no threat identified. People hear threat. Denver looked normal that morning, which made everything feel worse. Coffee shops opened, trucks moved down Colfax, students crossed campus wearing backpacks and headphones. The mountains sat west of town under clean early light. Nothing in ordinary life had permission to stop. That is one of the strangest parts of a scientific crisis. The cashier still wants payment. The bus still runs late. Somebody still argues about parking. Meanwhile, computers in Arizona, New Mexico, Hawaii, Chile, and Spain are comparing star positions and finding a hole in the sky that has edges, measurable growth, and no comfortable explanation. You want the world to look different because the facts are different. It refuses. By late morning, the southern hemisphere changed the story. A team using survey data from Chile found the same type of absence in a separate field, not connected on simple sky maps unless you projected both regions into galactic coordinates. That phrase sounds dry, but it hit hard. The night sky painted above your head is a two-dimensional view of a three-dimensional galaxy and a deeper universe behind it. Two patches far apart in the sky can be related in physical space or not. The Chile data suggested we were not looking at a random camera-shaped error or a local cloud drifting through one line of sight. We were looking at a boundary that made more sense when mapped against the structure of the Milky Way and nearby cataloged systems. The public version lagged behind by hours because every statement had to survive review. The private chats moved faster and got uglier. One group thought we were seeing an ultra-cold absorbing structure in the outer solar system. Another group argued it would have produced parallax during Earth's motion or changed the appearance of planets and asteroids behind it. A third group tried to model a swarm of dark objects far beyond Neptune. That died quickly because the angular coverage and sharpness were wrong. A few people talked about dark matter clumps until the lensing checks kept refusing to cooperate. Mara sent one more message at noon from Arizona. It said the lab network had gone read-only, outside storage blocked, visitors held at security, phones allowed but monitored in the control building. Then she added, "They are not hiding the data from the public yet. They are hiding groups from each other." I understood what she meant. In a normal crisis, you want independent teams because independent teams catch each other's mistakes. In a security crisis, officials sometimes split information because partial knowledge lowers leak risk. That can make sense with troop movements or classified hardware. It damages astronomy. If one team has infrared and another has spectroscopy and another has historic plates and no one can see the whole stack, you do not get safety, you get delayed understanding. I said that on air around 12:45, softer than I felt it. The producer told me through my earpiece to stay away from criticizing federal coordination. I ignored him and said the sky is not a classified facility. That clip spread fast. It made me a folk hero for about 30 minutes. Then half the internet decided I was part of the cover-up because I still refused to say aliens. That is the part people forget about public trust. Calm does not satisfy a frightened crowd for long. If you do not give people a monster, somebody else will sell them one. By mid-afternoon, One group online claimed the stars were being judged by God. Another claimed the government had turned off a projection screen around Earth. Another claimed observatories had known for years and were only admitting it because amateur astronomers caught them. None of those claims matched the timeline, the data, or basic physics. That did not slow them down. At 3:20, the first satellite issue became public through aviation chatter. It was not a failure, it was a calibration warning. Several spacecraft had rejected a star field used for attitude confirmation because expected reference points were missing in a region close to the anomaly. Most satellites had redundant stars and fallback algorithms. Nobody was losing control of fleets in orbit. Still, the warning mattered because it tied the darkened region to practical systems. The problem was no longer only about a picture in a telescope. It touched orientation, pointing, prediction, and the quiet machine layer that keeps modern life running. Flights did not stop, but a few high-latitude routes got extra review because upper atmosphere observations and satellite communications were already under watch. People heard that and bought gasoline. I do not blame them. Panic buying is stupid in the abstract and understandable at the checkout counter. A woman from Pueblo called into the broadcast and asked whether she should bring her kids inside after sunset. I told her the night sky would not harm her children. That was the truth. A man from Nebraska asked whether the sun could be next. I told him the observed region was far from the sun in the sky and there was no evidence of a solar event. That was also true. A pastor from Texas asked whether science could prove this was not a message. I told him science could test claims about light, matter, motion, and timing. It could not settle every fear in a human chest by dinner. The line went quiet for a second and then he thanked me. I remember that because it was one of the few sane exchanges that day. The first historic map breakthrough came from an old graduate student none of us had met. He was working in Massachusetts with digitized photographic plates from the early 20th century. Old plates are dirty in ways modern images are not. Scratches, emulsion defects, handwritten notes, dust, storage damage, all of it has to be handled carefully. He found something valuable anyway. In plates from different decades, a few stars near the current boundary showed slight brightness behavior that had never been flagged because each case looked isolated, not vanished, not dramatic, just low by a small amount against comparison stars. When mapped together, those old weak points formed a thin precursor zone ahead of the current absence. That meant the edge might not be new to our instruments. It might have been approaching detectability for a long time. That finding changed the scale again. If the boundary had a precursor, then we were not dealing with one clean screen passing in front of the sky. Something ahead of it was affecting light before the hard cutoff. Scattering without visible scatter, absorption without thermal return in our bands, or a form of redirection that made photons fail to arrive along our line of sight. I said those words slowly on the evening broadcast because I did not want anyone clipping me into a claim I had not made. Failing to arrive is not the same thing as being destroyed. Light can be blocked, bent, delayed, absorbed, or shifted into bands we are not looking at. The trouble was that each normal mechanism kept leaving missing fingerprints. At 5:11, Mara called instead of texting. Her voice was low, not scared in the dramatic sense, just tight and practical. She said she had seen a merged model from 3 facilities before access was pulled. The darkened region was not expanding evenly. One side advanced in small stepped segments, the other side lagged. There were narrow, clear lanes running through parts of the absence, then closing hours later. That was not how a natural dust cloud should behave across that mapped volume. It was not how a single gravitational object should behave. It was not random noise, it had structure. She said the phrase twice because she wanted me to repeat it on air if her lab went silent. It has structure. I asked her whether she meant artificial. She did not answer directly, and that told me she was still the scientist I remembered. Artificial is a heavy word. It carries too much heat, she said. Structured, directional, non-random, reproducible. Those words can survive peer review if the data supports them. Artificial can get a career burned before breakfast if spoken too early. Then she said something I did not understand at first. She said the blocked systems were not distributed by brightness, distance, or sky position alone. The strongest overlaps were with a private cross-catalog of exoplanet systems that had been tagged for follow-up because atmospheric readings, radio noise floors, or thermal behavior were unusual. Not confirmed civilizations, not little green men. Just systems considered interesting for life or technology searches. The edge had crossed too many of them first. I told her to be careful with that. People love patterns too much. When humans are frightened, we draw lines through scattered facts and call it meaning. Astronomers are not immune. We have software for that because our brains are not good enough. Mara said she knew. She said the team had run controls against random star fields, known exoplanet hosts, ordinary high-metallicity stars, young stellar objects, and catalog bias. The overlap did not vanish. It got weaker or stronger depending on the assumption, but it refused to go away. Then the call clicked and went dead. I tried calling back. It rang once, then gave me a network message. I did not say any of that on air, not yet. There is a difference between withholding a rumor and burying evidence. At 6 in the evening, the official briefing moved from cautious to strained. A panel of astronomers, agency representatives, and one uniformed officer sat behind a table in Washington. I was remote from Denver on a large screen, which felt absurd because I had slept less than an hour and still had noodle sauce on my jacket cuff. The lead scientist confirmed multi-site optical and infrared observations. He confirmed no known atmospheric or instrumental cause. He confirmed the boundary had changed relative to star catalogs. Then a reporter asked whether the affected region aligned with habitable exoplanet systems. The room changed. You could see it in faces. Nobody had briefed that reporter by accident. Somebody wanted the question in the open. The answer was careful enough to sound false even when it was partly true. The scientist said several catalog comparisons were underway and no conclusion about life-bearing worlds could be drawn. That was a fair sentence. It was also incomplete. The uniformed officer then said deep space navigation and satellite orientation systems remained operational. Also true. Then he said there was no evidence of hostile action against Earth. That one was the sentence I could not let pass without context. I leaned toward the camera and said, "No evidence against Earth is not the same thing as no evidence of action." The moderator tried to move on. The reporter came back harder. "Are stars being targeted?" Nobody answered for 6 full seconds. 6 seconds on live television is a long time. It is enough time for a kitchen to go quiet. It is enough time for a bartender to stop wiping a glass. It is enough time for millions of people to understand that the adults in the room are choosing words because every available word is dangerous. I filled the space because dead air breeds worse things. I said the data did not show stars being destroyed. It showed lines of sight going dark in a non-random pattern. I said the connection to life-bearing or technology candidate systems was under analysis and could still be affected by selection bias. I said we had to let the math be ugly without making it mystical. I meant that. I also knew the sentence would not hold the public for long. By nightfall, people were outside across the country. In Colorado Springs, families stood in driveways with binoculars. In Phoenix, people drove out toward darker desert roads until police started warning them not to park along highways. In New York, the problem was mostly invisible because the city lights had already taken most of the stars away from ordinary eyes. That irony made some people angry. They thought they were missing the end of the world because of light pollution. I kept saying this was not a naked eye event yet. That did not help. People wanted to look at the thing. A crisis feels less real when you are told the evidence sits in files you cannot open. Around 9:30, a group of amateur astronomers in Utah and Nevada produced the cleanest public confirmation yet. They used modest equipment, but they did everything right. Same field, different exposures, documented weather, comparison frames, raw files posted with calibration notes. Their images were not deep enough to capture the faintest missing sources, but they showed the brightest expected stars inside the edge were gone or weakened. That mattered socially. People who distrusted universities could download the files and check. People who distrusted government could see the same absence through backyard instruments. The crisis got worse because the evidence got better. At 10:15, I received a document through an encrypted academic channel from a colleague in California. I will not pretend I was brave. My hand shook while I opened it. The document was a draft model produced by a mixed group from observatories, planetary scientists, and orbital analysts. It did not claim an object. It described an advancing observation boundary. That phrase is important. An observation boundary is not a wall in space. It is the limit where information from beyond it no longer reaches a given observer in an expected way. The model treated the darkening as a moving disruption crossing lines of sight to distant systems. When corrected for stellar distances, the boundary did not fit a simple object near Earth. It fit a directional process moving through a region of the galaxy. The model had uncertainty ranges wide enough to drive a truck through. I said that later because people need to know when numbers are young. The direction was not settled. The speed was not settled. The distance scale was not settled. The mechanism was not settled. What was settled, at least enough to scare serious people, was that random disappearance was the worst fit. A random absorber would not care which systems had atmospheric anomalies. A dust front would not step around catalog groups then close lanes afterward. A natural lensing event would not erase without bending. A software error would not show up in backyard Utah data and chilly survey frames and old photographic plates. The remaining space for ordinary causes was not gone, but it was shrinking. The second morning opened with a rumor that the government had shut down all observatories. That was false. Some facilities had restricted outbound data, some had federal liaisons on site, some had canceled public tours. Some kept working under normal scientific agreements. I said that on air because sloppy fear helps bad actors. If you say everything is shut down when half the telescopes are still publishing weather logs, people stop believing anything. The truth was worse in a quieter way. The data was still flowing, but the channels had become guarded. Scientists were still talking, but some were now choosing every phrase around legal, security, and institutional pressure. That slows thought. In this case, slow thought was expensive. The next strong piece came from spectroscopy. A spectrum spreads light by wavelength, and it is one of the few ways astronomy can turn a dot into physical information. When a star is blocked by dust, gas, atmosphere, or certain materials, the spectrum changes in known ways. Absorption lines deepen, colors shift, emission can appear. In the boundary zone, spectra from partially affected sources showed a broad suppression that did not match normal interstellar extinction. It was not clean enough to name a mechanism. It was clean enough to say the light was being reduced across wide bands without the expected chemical signatures. One younger scientist called it gray loss in a private note. That phrase stuck because it sounded boring. Boring phrases can be terrifying when the data under them is bad. By noon, religious leaders, governors, agency heads, and school districts were all issuing separate statements. Some were responsible, some were nonsense in formal clothes. A district in Oklahoma canceled evening sports because parents were afraid of being outside after dark. A mayor in California told people the sky anomaly could not affect electricity. Then his city lost power because a transformer failed in ordinary heat and everyone blamed the stars. A preacher in Georgia filled a stadium and told people the heavens were being closed. A conspiracy channel claimed the dark region matched classified missile warning coverage, which was wrong in 3 different ways. I kept returning to the data because it was the only stable reference we had. The strangest calls came from ordinary people who were not hysterical at all. A farmer in eastern Colorado asked whether his animals would react before humans did. I told him there was no known local physical effect, so no. A truck driver outside Laramie asked whether global positioning would keep working. I said navigation satellites do not need that star field for everyday consumer positioning, though some space systems do use star references for orientation. A woman in Baltimore asked whether the missing stars had planets, and if people lived there, did those people know what was happening? That one stopped me. Not because it was unscientific, because it was the most human question of the day. I said we did not know whether anyone lived around those stars. Then I explained that astronomers can identify planets by tiny dips in starlight, by stellar wobble, by direct imaging in rare cases, by atmospheric clues when the alignment is generous. We can sometimes see signs that make a world interesting for life studies. Oxygen where it should not stay alone, methane with other chemistry, heat patterns, strange radio quiet or radio excess depending on context. None of that is a census of people. None of it gives us names, languages, histories, arguments, songs, bad coffee, or children refusing to sleep. The caller cried anyway, and I did not blame her. The idea that the dark edge had crossed other living places hit harder than any threat to Earth. That evening, Mara's name appeared in a leaked staff list from the Arizona facility. I hated seeing it online. People started sending her messages before I knew whether she could read them. Some called her a hero. Some called her a liar. Some demanded raw data. Some threatened her because frightened people sometimes look for a human target. I went on air and said no one should harass working scientists. I said the people inside those facilities were not sitting on a throne of secrets. They were tired, under pressure, and trying to make sense of measurements that refused to behave. I said if anyone wanted to be angry at vague statements and slow releases, not at the people doing reductions at 3 in the morning. At 8:47, the strongest reveal arrived by accident. At least that is how it looked from outside. A shared slide from a closed briefing appeared on 3 social platforms within 4 minutes. It showed the darkened regions projected against a catalog of nearby star systems with confirmed planets and a second catalog marked only by numbers. The first catalog was public. The second was not. Someone had overlaid a directional fit through both. A set of small arrows traced the inferred progression of the boundary, not across our sky, but through space after distance correction. The line did not point at Earth exactly. That would have been too clean, and bad science loves clean fear. The line crossed a volume that included several systems watched for possible biological or technological signatures. One predicted observation corridor passed close enough to the solar system that no responsible person could ignore it. People online immediately turned that into Earth is next tonight. That was wrong. It was wrong on distance, timing, and physics. The model did not say a wall would arrive before morning. It said that if the directional solution held, Earth lay along one of the future lines where an observer could expect disrupted light from inhabited or potentially inhabited systems, and where our own outward leakage might be visible to whatever process was involved. That is a colder sentence than Earth is next. It is also more useful. It means there is time to measure, argue, prepare instruments, protect data, and stop telling bedtime lies to adults. I used the phrase outward leakage on air and regretted it because it sounded too dramatic, but the concept is real enough for fiction writers and serious planners both to abuse. Earth has been transmitting radio energy into space for over a century, most of it weak, scattered, and hard to interpret at distance. Military radars, television carriers, planetary radar experiments, deep space communications, accidental noise, deliberate messages, all of it forms a messy record that expands at light speed. It is not a bright signpost announcing our address across the whole galaxy. That is an exaggeration. Yet to a technology far beyond ours, we cannot assume invisibility. The honest sentence is boring and awful. We do not know how detectable we are. The next day, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the National Science Foundation, and several international partners released a joint evidence packet. It was the best thing anyone had done so far. Raw frames were limited for security and privacy reasons tied to facility systems, but process data, masks, comparison plots, and methodology notes were public. The packet did not say civilization. It said non-random correlation with selected stellar environments remains under review. It did not say attack. It said directional structure not consistent with known local optical, atmospheric, or catalog errors. It did not say stars turned off. It said sources failed detection across multiple independent observing platforms. Careful language saved the science and angered almost everyone. I spent 3 hours walking through that packet for viewers. I did not use fancy slides. I used plain explanations because people can handle more than producers think if you do not talk down to them. First, catalog check. Were the stars really supposed to be there? Yes, based on multiple historic and modern records. Second, instrument check. Did different equipment see the same thing? Yes. Third, atmosphere check. Could weather, smoke, humidity, or turbulence do it? Not with the same boundary across separate sites. Fourth, wavelength check. Did the missing light match dust behavior? No, not cleanly. Fifth, gravity check. Did the field show lensing expected from a massive object? No. Sixth, time check. Did the boundary change? Yes. That was the basic structure of the story, and I repeated it until my voice went rough. Late that afternoon, Denver had its first public panic event tied directly to the anomaly. A crowd gathered outside a federal building downtown after a rumor spread that scientists had a countdown. There was no countdown. There was a confidence interval in a draft model, and somebody who did not understand math turned it into a clock. Police blocked the street. A man climbed onto a concrete planter and yelled that the government had sold the sky. People booed, prayed, filmed, cried, argued, and checked their phones. I watched from a studio window and felt older than 60, not because the crowd was foolish. Because every person down there had been handed a fact too large for normal life, and most institutions were still speaking in committee language. That night, Mara got one call through. She sounded exhausted. She said the Arizona facility had been placed under a federal data preservation order, not a military seizure. Staff could leave if no active observing duty required them, but storage devices were checked, and outbound traffic was logged. She said some people were furious, some relieved, some too tired to care. Then she told me about the lane closures. Inside the dark region, several thin bands of stars had remained visible for hours after adjacent stars vanished, then went dark in a sequence. Not simultaneous, sequential. The bands were not aligned with our detector rows, not with atmospheric dispersion, not with catalog groupings. The sequence suggested that whatever interrupted the light had internal patterning or moved in segments. I asked whether the segments could be caused by separate clouds or filaments. She said yes in the abstract, no in the numbers she had seen. Then she said the sentence that made me sit down. Some of the lanes corresponded to lines of sight toward systems with no known planets, while neighboring lines toward planet-bearing systems darkened first. That could be bias, that could be bad catalog completeness. That could be the human brain seeing purpose. But the team had already tried to kill the pattern and had not killed it. She asked me whether I still had friends in the old radio astronomy groups. I said yes. She said, ask them if any narrowband archives from those coordinates show sudden silence before the optical drop. Radio astronomy became the next battlefield. Optical data tells you light is missing. Radio data can tell you whether an emitting source went quiet, shifted, or vanished from a band before visible light did. The trouble is that most stars are not strong radio broadcasters in ways that help this problem, and technosignature searches are scattered, underfunded, and full of non-detections that are hard to interpret. Still, archives exist. Listening projects, sky surveys, old targeted observations, accidental captures during other work. By morning, a small group had found at least 3 candidate systems where weak narrowband oddities recorded years earlier were followed, in corrected sequence, by optical suppression in the new model. That sounds huge. It was also fragile. Weak signals are dangerous evidence because people want them to carry more weight than they can. I said that on air and got hammered from both sides. One side said I was hiding proof of alien civilizations. The other said I was feeding panic by mentioning radio at all. That is what happens when the truth sits between clean camps. The radio evidence did not prove inhabited systems. It raised the cost of dismissing the pattern. That is enough in science to keep going and not enough to make banners. I told the audience that life in the universe could be common, rare, loud, quiet, simple, complex, older than us, younger than us, or absent from those systems entirely. The darkening pattern did not give us permission to pretend we knew more than we did. It gave us permission to be worried with discipline. By the third night, the darkened area had a public name, and I hated it, the Blackout Zone. Media people love names because names make graphics easier. Scientists kept using coordinate masks, boundary progression, and catalog suppression. The public used Blackout Zone, and that was that. Amateur maps appeared with red edges, then scarier versions with skulls, then fake versions showing half the galaxy gone. I spent part of the broadcast debunking images instead of explaining new data, which is what misinformation does. It steals hours from reality. A boy in Idaho sent a hand-drawn star chart to the network with a note asking whether he had marked the missing part correctly. His chart was better than half the viral maps. The third night also brought the first naked eye change, though barely. A few observers in very dark locations reported that a familiar dense patch near the Milky Way looked thinner through binoculars. Most people still could not see it. Cameras could. Long exposures from rural Colorado showed a faint missing section in the background star field. I almost did not use that word on air because it sounded too visual, too emotional, but I needed ordinary people to understand the shape without turning it into a creature. I corrected myself immediately and called it an absence with a curved edge. That is less catchy. It is also more honest. The best minds I knew were now split into 3 rough camps. The first camp still looked for a natural absorber outside known categories: exotic dust, cold macrostructure, strange plasma behavior, a foreground population of compact objects. The second camp looked for information effects. Light being delayed, redirected, filtered, or scrambled by a process not well described by ordinary absorption. The third camp, the one nobody wanted to join out loud, treated the structure as possibly engineered or biological at astronomical scale. I did not trust that third phrase. Biological at astronomical scale can become nonsense quickly. Engineered can become arrogance quickly. Yet procedure required that a hypothesis not be dismissed simply because it made us uncomfortable. The government cared about the second camp most. If light from known sources could be redirected or filtered in a structured way, then signals could be manipulated too. Deep space communication, pulsar timing, star tracker catalogs, surveillance calibration, missile warning background models. Scientific observatories were only the visible part of a deeper dependence on stable reference points. A senior official said during a closed briefing, according to someone in the room, that modern civilization assumes the sky's a fixed accounting system. I wish he had said it publicly. It was the cleanest non-technical description I heard all week. We use the sky to know where we are, where our machines are, and whether our instruments are telling the truth. On the fourth day, the story took a turn that made the panic quieter instead of louder. The darkening did not race across the sky. It slowed in apparent angular growth after a rapid early expansion. That did not mean safety. It meant distance, geometry, and structure were more complex than the public had imagined. The first wave of panic had been built around tonight, tomorrow, this week. The data refused to provide that cheap fear. The projected timelines ranged from meaningless to generational, depending on which model survived. I told viewers that the danger might not be immediate in the household sense. The danger was epistemic, operational, and long range. Then I apologized because epistemic is a terrible word for television and explained it plain. The danger is that we may be losing trust in parts of the sky we use to measure reality. That afternoon, a caller from Kansas asked whether he should keep paying his mortgage. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was brutally practical. People do not live inside scientific papers. They live inside bills, school pickups, medication schedules, rent, crops, shift work, and bad knees. I told him yes, keep paying it if he could. No validated model said his town would be swallowed by darkness next month. He said that was not comforting. I said comfort is not the same thing as guidance. He said fair enough. That little exchange did more for public trust than half the official statements because it admitted the actual problem. People were not only afraid of dying, they were afraid of not knowing how normal to stay. Mara's last file reached me on the fourth night through a chain I will not describe. It was not a leak of raw restricted data. It was her own summary table, stripped of facility identifiers, with columns she knew I would understand. Distance estimate, suppression onset, full loss, candidate planetary status, prior signal anomaly, boundary lane behavior, model residual. At the bottom she had written one note. If this is a front, it is selecting. If it is selecting, selection criteria include more than luminosity and position. I read that line 10 times. Then I deleted the local copy after printing it because I was becoming paranoid in ways that felt reasonable. That is not a good state for a scientist, but it is an honest one. I did not share her table on air. I shared the concept after two other sources confirmed similar findings in broader terms. That matters. One source can be wrong. One source can be emotional. One source can be tricked by bad data. Three independent sources with different stakes do not make truth automatic, but they raise the floor. I told the audience that a subset of affected systems appeared overrepresented in catalogs associated with planetary habitability studies and possible technosignature interest. I said that did not prove inhabited worlds. Then I said the harder sentence. If the pattern holds, something about the affected systems may matter to the process causing the darkening. I could feel the studio change around me. The crew understood that we had crossed from strange astronomy into the possibility of a targeted cosmic phenomenon. A targeted phenomenon does not have to mean a mine. Predators target, viruses target, chemical reactions target, machines target. Natural filters target because physics gives them rules. The word target only means the process is not indifferent to all inputs. I said that because the public had split into two childish options, random space cloud or alien army. Reality has more possibilities than that. The data showed direction and structure. It showed possible correlation with systems of biological or technological interest. It did not show ships. It did not show messages. It did not show intent. Intent is one of the last things you get to claim, not one of the first. The fifth day brought international confirmation strong enough that denial stopped being respectable. Observatories in the Canary Islands, South Africa, Chile, Hawaii, and Australia contributed to a shared reduction. Space-based assets added constraints above the atmosphere. The boundary existed. The suppression was real. The wavelength behavior remained wrong for ordinary dust. Lensing remained weak or absent where it should have helped. The time evolution was structured. Those were the pillars. Around them, everything else still fought. A European scientist said during a public forum that humanity had discovered a new class of astrophysical opacity. An American defense consultant said off-mic that opacity does not decide which radio interest systems to cover first. The clip leaked. The consultant resigned from the advisory panel by morning. That resignation became a scandal for 12 hours, then got buried by the Mars comparison. Someone noticed that several deep space probes using star fields near the affected region had logged small orientation residuals months earlier, not failures. Residuals, tiny differences between expected star tracker solutions and inertial reference, Calculations. At the time, engineers treated them as software quirks, stray light or catalog aging. When folded into the new boundary model, a few residuals lined up with early precursor behavior. Again, not proof. Again, not nothing. The machine record had seen a whisper before the human story began. I said machine record on air and then explained it because I could hear my father in my head telling me not to talk in committee language. Machines keep logs. Logs do not panic. Logs do not pray. Logs do not chase clout. Logs can still be wrong, but they are wrong in ways we can test. The spacecraft logs mattered because they were written before anyone knew to be afraid. That makes them valuable. A prior record beats a fresh interpretation almost every time. If a probe complained about a star field before the first public report, it weakens the claim that this whole thing was created by mass hysteria or edited images. I watched a panelist try to dodge that point and fail. By then, my life had narrowed to water, cough drops, data notes, and a chair under hot studio lights. I slept in little pieces. I do not include that for drama. I include it because tired people make mistakes, and the public was now depending on tired people. Astronomers were tired. Engineers were tired. Watch officers were tired. Producers were tired. Every statement needed someone rested enough to ask, "Are we sure?" That question became rare. I started forcing myself to say it out loud before every segment. Are we sure this is confirmed? Are we sure this is interpretation? Are we sure this word will not outrun the evidence? Half of crisis communication is refusing your own adrenaline. On the sixth day, the official model finally used the phrase observation line. It said Earth lay near a projected observation line associated with the continued progression of the structured darkening pattern. It did not say impact. It did not say arrival. It did not say invasion. It said observation line because the event was still measured by what light reached us from other places. The distinction sounds delicate until you remove it. If Earth lies near a physical path, you prepare one way. If Earth lies near an observational corridor, you prepare another. You build instruments, protect archives, diversify navigation references, monitor signals, and stop assuming every dark point in a catalog is a local failure. That same bulletin acknowledged the life catalog issue in the driest language possible. It said the progression showed a statistically significant association with stellar systems previously prioritized for planetary atmosphere. Techno-signature follow-up, pending correction for survey bias. I could practically hear millions of people asking, "Does that mean aliens?" I answered before the anchor could ask. No, it means systems we already thought were interesting are showing up too often in the affected set. It means the next job is to find out whether our catalog choices caused that pattern or whether the universe did. It means we do not get to laugh it away and we do not get to worship it either. The strongest public reaction was not panic by then. It was grief for strangers. That surprised me. People made lists of the affected stars with possible planets. They gave names to worlds that had only catalog designations. Some of those names were silly, some were sweet, some were angry. A school in Oregon held a vigil for unknown people around unknown suns. Scientists grumbled because the habitability status was uncertain, and they were right. They were also missing something. The public had understood the moral scale before the institutions knew how to speak about it. If even one affected system had life, then the darkening was not just an astronomy problem. It was a silence spreading through neighborhoods we could not visit. I still refuse to call them dead worlds. That mattered to me. Absence of received light is not proof of death. If a city turns off its windows during a storm, the city still exists. That sentence came too close to a comparison, so on air I stripped it down. Darkness is not death. Suppressed light is not confirmed destruction. We had no direct images of surfaces, no biological readings after the event, no communication from inhabitants, no casualty counts, no proof of extinction. What we had was loss of optical and radio access along certain lines. That is terrible enough. There is no need to inflate it with certainty we do not possess. Mara reappeared on the seventh day in a public technical briefing from Arizona. She looked pale and angry. She did not mention me. Good. She walked through the filter data with a steadiness that made me proud in a private way I had no right to show. She said the boundary advanced in discrete segments. She said the lane behavior remained unexplained. She said catalog correlation survived first-order bias correction and required wider review. Then a reporter asked whether she believed the darkening was intelligent. Mara looked down at her notes, then back at the camera. She said, "I believe it is structured in a way our known natural models do not yet explain." That was the right answer. It was also the most frightening answer available from an honest scientist. That night, after her briefing, my producer asked if I wanted to stop. I said no too fast. He told me I was starting to sound rough. I told him everyone sounded rough. He said the network could bring in another expert. I told him to do that, and they did. A younger cosmologist from Princeton joined me, and she was excellent. She corrected me twice on statistical phrasing, which I appreciated, then explained large-scale structure with more patience than I had left. The audience needed to see experts disagree cleanly. Not every disagreement is a scandal. Sometimes it is the sound of a field doing its job. The younger cosmologist pushed back on the inhabited system's interpretation harder than I did. She said the catalogs of interesting planets were built from uneven detection methods. We are better at finding certain types of planets around certain types of stars. We follow up targets that are easier to measure. Our radio archives are patchy. Our atmospheric data is biased toward worlds that transit from our viewpoint. A pattern can emerge from the shape of our attention. She was right to say it. I said so on air. Then I asked her whether those biases explained the segment timing and lane closures. She said no, not yet. That was the honest edge of the debate. By the 8th day, the world had learned to live beside the impossible for a little while. Schools reopened evening events. Some churches kept nightly services. Amateur astronomers organized public viewing sessions with strict rules against panic claims. Government agencies released daily technical summaries. Markets wobbled, recovered, wobbled again. There were scams, of course. Star blackout insurance, survival kits with telescopes nobody needed, fake pills that claimed to protect against cosmic radiation, though no radiation increase had been detected. One man in Nevada sold backyard bunkers with sky shields. People bought them. Fear always creates vendors. The scientific work got better once the first wave of terror burned down into routine. Teams built a common repository. Independent reviewers got access. The old photographic plate analysis expanded. Spacecraft residual logs were cross-checked. Infrared upper limits were tightened. Radio archives were cleaned. The event did not become less strange. It became better bounded. That is what science can do in a crisis. It cannot promise comfort. It can reduce the size of the unknown piece by piece. Sometimes the unknown remains huge after you reduce it. That is not failure. That is a measurement. On the 9th day, the modelers produced the first map I believed and hated. It showed no countdown. It showed probability bands. It showed the inferred direction of the structured boundary through nearby space under several assumptions. In 2 assumptions, the solar system was not physically in the path. In one, it was close to a corridor associated with signal-bearing systems. In another, the model failed because the required speed or geometry became unreasonable. That spread of outcomes was exactly what serious work produces. It was messy, conditional, and useful. The public wanted one line. The universe gave us a family of bad possibilities. I went on air with that map and said the most important thing I could say. This is not the end tonight. This is not permission to stop living. This is also not normal. We have confirmed a structured loss of starlight across multiple fields, instruments, wavelengths, and archives. We have evidence that the pattern has direction. We have evidence that the pattern may interact more strongly with systems we already considered interesting for life or technology studies. We have no proof of destruction, no proof of intent, and no validated timeline for local physical danger. All 4 of those statements can be true at once. Adults have to hold more than one fact at a time. The phrase adults have to hold more than one fact at a time got clipped everywhere. Some people loved it, some hated it. A senator accused me of condescension. Maybe he was right. I was tired of childish certainty, and tired men get sharp. The next morning I apologized for the tone but not the point. We cannot demand simple answers from complex evidence and then punish every institution that refuses to lie. We also cannot let institutions hide behind complexity to avoid saying what the evidence suggests. That balance is hard. It is supposed to be hard. The day it feels easy is the day someone is selling you a script. Mara sent one final public message through her university account on the 10th day. It said her team would release a preprint after interagency review and independent replication. She thanked amateur observers for disciplined submissions. She asked people not to assign names or fates to candidate worlds. Then she wrote one sentence that sounded plain until you sat with it. We are observing a loss of access, not a confirmed loss of existence. I read it on air because it was better than anything I had written. That sentence held the whole crisis in one hand without crushing it into drama. By then, I had stopped thinking of the dark region as a whole. That word is too simple. A whole is an absence in one place. This was a process. A set of rules moving through observations. A structured interruption with a direction, a timing, and a preference we did not yet understand. It touched real systems. It touched possible living worlds. It touched satellites and old plates and backyard telescopes and families standing outside after dinner. It made the sky feel procedural, not mystical. That was the part that scared me most. Mysteries can stay vague. Procedures have steps. On the 11th night, I returned to Boulder for the first time since the story broke. The campus was quiet. A few students had set up small telescopes on the lawn. Someone had taped a printed finder chart to a folding table. No one was screaming. No one was chanting. They were taking turns looking through eyepieces, checking laptops, arguing softly about exposure length. That gave me more hope than any official statement. The human answer to a darkening sky was not only panic. It was also a line of tired kids sharing equipment and writing down what they saw. One of them recognized me and asked whether I wanted to look. I did. Through the small telescope, the field did not show the full crisis. It never could. It showed a few points of light and a darker background where better instruments knew more should be present. I did not pretend to see more than I saw. That is another discipline people forget. Do not upgrade your own eyes because the story is big. I stepped away and told the student his tracking was good. He grinned because praise for tracking from an old professor still matters in the middle of cosmic trouble. Ordinary pride survives. Good. The 12th day brought no grand reveal. That disappointed the audience, I think. People had adjusted to escalation and wanted the next step to be bigger. Science does not owe narrative rhythm to anyone. The work that day was smaller and more useful. Teams improved bias correction. Engineers updated star tracker exclusion lists. Deep space mission planners built alternate reference fields. Observatories standardized public anomaly reports so amateurs would not flood inboxes. with every bad image. The world did not end. It adapted a little. That is not a happy ending. It is a human one. Late that night, the national feed asked me for a final segment before rotating coverage to a wider panel. I looked into the camera and told the truth in the simplest terms I had left. The stars did not begin turning off one by one in the way a child imagines switches on a wall. What happened is stranger and more serious. Light from known stars and systems stopped arriving along defined lines. The loss was confirmed by independent observers. The affected region changed with time. The change had structure. Some of that structure may relate to systems where life or technology had already been considered worth studying. Earth is not confirmed to be in immediate danger, but Earth is now part of the model. That is where we stand. I told people to keep living. Not because normal life was guaranteed, but because collapse by rumor is still collapse. Keep paying bills if you can. Keep schools open when local safety allows. Keep checking on neighbors. Keep letting scientists argue in public. Keep demanding data without demanding fake certainty. Keep your kids from doom feeds at midnight. Go outside and look up if the sky is clear, but do not expect your eyes to carry the whole burden. Human eyes were not built for evidence at this scale. That is why we built instruments, archives, networks, and methods. Those things are not perfect. They are better than fear alone. After the cameras cut, I stayed in the chair for a while because standing up felt harder than it should have. A producer came in and asked whether I needed anything. I said water. He brought it, then asked off the record whether I thought someone was out there. I told him that was the wrong first question. The right first question is whether the pattern is real. Yes. The second is whether known causes explain it. Not yet. The third is whether the pattern shows selection. Possibly. The fourth is whether that selection implies life, technology, intent, or some natural process we have never seen. We do not know. He looked disappointed. People always do when honesty refuses to become a movie line. I went home before dawn. The drive from Denver to Boulder was quiet. Trucks moved in the right lane. A highway sign warned about construction near an exit. The world kept giving instructions for ordinary problems. Merge left. Slow down. Watch for workers. That steadied me. When I reached my house, I stood in the driveway and looked up. The sky over the Front Range was not perfect. City lights softened it. A thin cloud line sat west of town. I could see enough stars to understand why people had once believed they were permanent. I also knew permanence had always been a story we told because our lives are short. The darkened region was above the horizon, but I could not see the full absence with my bare eyes. I knew where it was. That was enough. Somewhere in that direction, light that should have arrived did not. Somewhere behind that missing light were stars, planets, maybe empty rock, maybe oceans, maybe machines, maybe nothing with a name. The data did not allow comfort, and it did not allow surrender. It allowed work. So that is what I am telling you now. We work, we measure, we correct each other. We refuse panic when panic lies, and we refuse calm when calm becomes a cover. The stars did not turn off for us all at once. The universe gave us a pattern, and patterns can be studied. If this is natural, it will teach us physics we were not ready to learn. If it is artificial, it will force humanity to grow up faster than any speech or war ever could. If it is neither word in any clean sense, then our categories are too small and we will have to build better ones under pressure. I do not know which answer is true. I know the first observers did their job. I know the old plates mattered. I know the backyard astronomers mattered. I know Mara and her team kept the evidence alive when institutions wanted time to manage it. I know Earth lies close enough to one predicted observation line that no serious person can call this someone else's problem anymore. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not doom, not certainty, responsibility. We have spent generations using the stars for calendars, navigation, research, and private hopes. Now a section of that old reference system has changed in a way that points back to the deepest question we have ever asked. Whether anyone else is out there, and what happens to civilizations that become visible. The first sign was not a greeting. It arrived as missing light. Maybe that is all the warning we get. Maybe it is only the first page of a longer problem. Either way, the right response is not to scream at the sky. The right response is to keep looking, keep records, and tell the truth before fear edits it for us.